Hey everyone, welcome to the CU Digital Town Hall number 49. Notice that we're creeping up on 52 there, Michael.
I know it's going to be a full
we're
year.
actually going to do something really cool for the year anniversary of this.
We should.
We've got some plans for that, so
Okay.
we'll be putting that out soon. It is Wednesday, February 24th. As always, we meet every Wednesday here just to kind of talk about what's going on. And we started doing this as a reality of the pandemic because I wasn't sure what to do. A lot of people weren't. And we've grown this little group that gets together, and it's always exciting. And I also like to invite my friends, and so we'll get to that in a minute. In the meantime, you know me, my name's John Best. I am the CEO of Best Innovation Group. We like to do cool things for credit unions. We have a lot of fun, and we're certainly been doing a lot lately. And my partner in crime, which I just finished a really cool interview with yesterday, Mike Lawson.
I can't wait to put that one together.
Yeah, it's going to be different. It certainly is going to be different. So we'll see how that goes for everyone. Let's move on to the next slide. So I am very excited. So I like to tell this story. So many years ago, when I worked at Suncoast Schools, I remember listening to them, and we were right in the middle of a conversion. We were converting from Miser to Summit. And I remember I was listening somewhere. I was under somebody's desk where I normally hung out, not like creepy, but because I had to like repin RS-232 cables and put in mice. And back then the mice weren't USB. They had like special plugs on them and all this kind of stuff. And I overheard them talking about their new home banking, and they had no home banking. And their plan was to buy this product that you would send out to everybody with discs. And I had been doing just a ton of work. I had come from the school system, so I was a teacher, and we were using something called FERN. And what FERN was, the Florida Educational Resources Network, they evolved into part of the internet. And so I had a good feeling about the internet, and I knew it was growing at the time. So I bumped my head in the table and I said, hey, you guys shouldn't do that. You should look at the internet. And what they heard was Satan is coming and John is their leader. I think that's what they heard. I'm not 100%, but I feel like that's what they heard. So after they ran me out of there, I went back to my hole to dig up some more mice and clean the mice balls, which was part of my job back then. Not a gross thing. I'm not sure. I'm just saying you had to break out the little balls and clean them.
That might be too much information, John.
Right. Well, that's what I had to do. So I went back to my hole, but the CEO showed up at my desk and he said, hey, tell me more about this internet thing. And I said, I told him about it. And he thanked me and he left. He came back later and said, I want you to meet this guy. I'm going to have him in town. He's going to come to town. And this, for me, you got to understand, I'm the guy that climbs under your desk and fixes the mice, you know. So getting invited down to a fancy restaurant to meet someone was like, I had no clue what was going on. That was, you know, my days were carrying things across there. So I go and I go to this restaurant. It's downtown in a place called Ybor City in Tampa. If you've never been there, it's a wonderful place, really cool. And we went to some Cajun style restaurant, if I remember right. And this guy comes in and his partner, and I noticed he's wearing a suit, and I felt bad for him because this is Florida and it's like August. And somehow what was impressive about this dude was he managed not to sweat at all. I always thought, wow, you know, executives have their sweat glands removed. I didn't know that. And so he comes in, he does this pitch, and the entire time I'm like, yeah, that's what I've been talking about. Yeah. And the whole time, but the team now believes that the disciples of Satan have come together, including me, and brought like a leader in even higher up than me. And that person was Paul Fiore, and he was very early on. I think probably we might have been, maybe the third or fourth client he might have ever pitched. Paul was, you know, what would become a very successful organization and a famous organization, Digital Insight, which was a lot of folks probably on this call had Digital Insight at one point or another. And the founder of that, the guy who saw it coming, was Paul. And so on the way out, I'll never forget this. We were leaving and we were walking out to the parking lot. And I just happened to, you know, Paul and I were poor, so we had to park in the way corner of the place by the cigar factories, whereas everybody else had like valet parking. I didn't know I could do that, and I wasn't about to valet park my 1980 Scirocco. So we're walking back, and Paul goes, "Hey, you should come work for me at some point." And I thought, wow, that sounds cool. But he sort of explained it to me. I went home and I talked to my wife, and she said, we have 2 small kids. Do you think, how many people work there? I said, well, Paul said there were at least him and that guy. And then she said, okay, well, how many clients do they have? I said, he said he's got one coming. And she said, well, how do you think, do they have benefits? Well, he said he'd figure that out. Needless to say, she thought it wasn't the world's best idea. But had I joined, wouldn't I have been like employee number 3 or 4?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So after that day, I vowed to never miss an opportunity. And Paul's called me many times and kept in touch with me from that day forward, which is really cool because a lot of people in his position wouldn't. And he's agreed to join us today. I'm going to let him tell a little of his story. But I was interested in what, with digital changing so much, what Paul might think about, the founder of Digital Insight might think about what the next thing is, because I know he's always looking for those things. So, Paul, thank you so much for joining, and thank you for enduring my long story. Real quickly, our sponsors, CUNA Councils, thank you so much. CUNA is always supportive of us. Next week is the GAC. Next Wednesday is when I'm doing the, on the 3rd, I believe, or the 4th, one of the two. I have pre-recorded I think it's an hour-long session with CEOs, with Tom O'Shea, who's here with us.
Right on.
Make sure you attend that. If you're not already attending, if you don't know how to go there, there's the link below. But if you need more information, let me know. And then obviously CU Broadcast. This couldn't happen without Mike. If I didn't have Mike's support, I probably wouldn't be doing this. And obviously my company, Big. So let's move on. Paul, tell us a little bit about, give us the story. I always love your story. So not everybody here knows who you are probably. So fill us in.
Sure. Thanks, John. Well, first of all, there's a lot of faces on here, names that I recognize. So for those of you who I've met, really good to reconnect and get in and out of the banking, finance, credit union space and always find my way back in. And that's probably because my very, very first job out of high school was at GHQ Federal Credit Union, 222 Broadway in Manhattan. And something special happened. Their board basically gave me a $10,000 budget to buy a computer. And because I graduated high school in '82, and everyone who graduated high school was either in college or already in the workforce, nobody knew what a computer was and how to get it to do stuff. So I figured out a way to start doing some of the back office accounting, fixed assets, et cetera, from paper ledgers into a computer system. And just to say an embarrassing story, I remember thinking, this is so big and so new that software, especially accounting software, if it worked for GHQ Federal Credit Union, it'll probably work for every credit union and every bank. So I went out and met John Levy. I don't know how many of you know John, an industry veteran in the printing space. And I told him, John, I want to get business cards printed, and I'm going to start a consulting company. I'm going to start to help other credit unions launch the different various programs I put together. And this was really early on, so before Peachtree, et cetera. And I'll never forget, I saw someone's business card and it had the letter CPA at the end. I didn't know what that meant. I thought it'd be cool to put 3 letters at the end of my name. So I put Paul Fiore and I made up 3 letters. And John Levy's like, so what do these 3 letters mean? I'm like, I don't know. It just seems cool. And he's like, I don't think you could put those letters after your. I'm like, John, don't worry about it. Just do it. I'll deal with it. And then for the next year, every time I handed out my business card, somebody asked me what those letters meant. And I was always embarrassed to say, oh, they don't mean anything. I just put them in myself. What happened was I went credit union to move to New Jersey. I ended up staying on Long Island, worked for a bank in Long Island, and basically just changed the name of GHQ Credit Union to Continental Bank and launched the same software. But because I was so young, 19 and inexperienced and uneducated, the PC revolution completely passed me by. But it was a seminal moment for me because I remember saying, if there ever is something else as big as PCs and software for computers, an industry that I know about, like credit unions and banking, I'm going to jump on it. And at one point, it was document imaging was kind of a big deal. And I learned everything I could about that, but it never quite became the thing it was promised to be. And then the internet came along and I vowed to take advantage of it. And, it was the right time. We had the right product, the right solution, the right people. And very proud of what we accomplished.
So just background, when you finally moved on or sold into Digital Insight to Intuit, there was how many clients? Do you remember?
So I'll tell you the story about the first one and then, get to that. So I remember we needed a pilot, and XP Systems, of course, was kind of the company that Daniel Jacoby and I both worked for when we started Digital Insight, and they had a bunch of clients. And I asked who was the first credit union in America to do ATM machines? Having just read Crossing the Chasm, the book about how you need to find early adopters for new technology. And they said, it's Gary Bass in Plano, Texas, CEO of Community Credit Union, was the first credit union in America to do ATMs. So I called Gary and I'm like, Gary, congratulations. I hear you were the first at ATMs. He's like, yeah, we're proud. I said, how would you like to be the first credit union in America to do internet banking? And he said, what's internet banking? And I said, it doesn't matter. You're going to be first, right? We'll build it. We won't even charge you. If you like it, you pay. And I only asked one thing. I said, when I come to Plano to deliver the data in about 6 months, you please invite 4 or 5 of your friends and colleagues. And I'd like to present it all at one time. So that was in January of 1995. I flew to Plano, Texas, and I had my laptop and a demo. And Gary was smart. He didn't invite any credit unions from Dallas. He invited credit unions from Houston and San Antonio. He didn't want any of his, because he was community chartered. He didn't want any of his competitors to see this. And at the end of the demo, and it went great, we actually paid $100 from Gary's checking account to Gary's credit card. And I was holding my finger over the enter button. And I'm like, here's what's going to happen, right? We're here in Dallas and it's going to go over the SBC telecom modem, and then it's going to go to the internet, then it's going to go on a private frame relay network back to our headquarters in California. We're going to then go back on this private network and ping the XP Systems host to get all this information. And as I'm explaining, it sounds like it's going to be a 20-minute thing. And when I hit enter, because it was the only transaction on our network, it cleared in 5 milliseconds.
Yeah.
So you can see the mouths open in the room, and of course, everyone there signed up. It showed the power of solving a real problem with an effective demo with the right solution. The hardest part was convincing people that it was technically secure. So by the time we sold, I guess we had over 800 clients.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge success story. And I remember when Paul and I started working together formally, we went to Digital Insight, and what was wild was not only did he build an incredible product and service, but it's not very often you can go to a place 10, 15 years later and the same people, all that built that organization, were still working there and still knew Paul. And that says something for the team building skills and the leadership. So yeah, it was a pretty cool story. And I've always thought, Paul just seems to have a sense. And I remember he called me about 2 years ago and he said, hey, I need some crypto help. And I was in the middle of doing CU Ledger and working in self-sovereign identity, and I'd done a lot of research in the blockchain. And well, why don't you tell them about kind of what you're doing these days, Paul, since you've done that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's always great to reconnect with John and talk about ideas. So I have a business outside of the banking space that I'm on the board of, and I'm president of, an investor in, that does wholesale food distribution called ePallet, ePallet.com. Terrific company. But I also continue to contact people in the banking space. And it feels to me like what's happening with decentralized finance, with challenger banks, with companies that are building suites of products around plastic cards or blockchain are kind of here. In 2010, Green Dot started. I actually was there for a year. And the way I got there, they were hiring all the former engineers at Digital Insight because they ran the same hardware and software systems. I was explaining to the founder CEO of Green Dot that you are like a credit union in the 1930s, right? There were banks coming out of the Depression. There were people that found difficulty going in and opening a new account and feeling welcome and getting access to banking accounts. And today there are immigrants and people who've lost their check writing privileges from bounced checks. We just want to be able to buy something on Amazon, and they're shut out of the banking system. And Green Dot did it, but without branches. And the credit industry from 2010 to this year's doubled about from 800 billion to 1.7 trillion in assets. Green Dot has gone up 20x, right? From 180 million in 2010 to 1.5 billion. They're one of many, many companies that have built a suite of services without branches that serve what would have been the credit union member of decades ago. So when you see these new opportunities coming, you're wondering, where is the interplay for our industry, credit unions, to at least know when's the right time to jump in, when is too early, when is to copy some of those services so we could offer them to members as well. So the conversation John and I had around crypto, which, I guess spurred this invite, was there's a company just formed, really, really sharp. Just to give you some sense of the advisors, it's the head of blockchain at Amazon, the head of machine learning at Amazon Web Services. I'm probably the dumbest person in that group, but what they're looking to establish is connecting, almost like the way a shared branch network would have used and leveraged the ATM network, or the way EDS would have leveraged the eFit network back in the 80s, to connect independently owner-operated ATM machines, which have billions of dollars in cash. And like your business, if your credit union has cash in the vault or in an ATM, you're able to hypothecate it, lend against it, and generate revenue. Independent ATM owner-operators don't have that luxury. So this really brilliant individual, he was one of the first to hack the iPhone. He was in the Wall Street Journal. He's a finance fellow for being an Ethereum developer.
Currently working on JP Morgan Coin.
Yeah, he was one of the engineers that worked on the JP Morgan Quorum or the Ethernet network. Ethereum token network. So he came up with an idea. What if we took that entire network of unusable cash, converted it into a stable coin, which is simply a US dollar, but it underlying on a blockchain. So there are people, believe it or not, who don't want to bet that Bitcoin or Ethereum are going to go up or down, but they still want to provide liquidity to the marketplace, either helping shorts, doing market making, serving the bid ask, doing arbitrage, doing OTC transactions for off-network settlement. And if they're going to just say, all right, I'll do transactions between the bid and the ask of Bitcoin, they need to put up capital. So they need to put up cash to be able to buy Bitcoin at the ask price, and they need to put up Bitcoin to sell at the bid price. And if they don't want to take exposure to the ups and downs of the market, they need to borrow Bitcoin and need to provide that service. So there's an entire industry, which is now the crypto industry is bigger than the credit industry. It's over $1.5 trillion. All formed in the last couple of years to provide this liquidity back. So there's probably 20 services that credit union banking industry could dip their toes into the crypto world. Everything from providing custodial services, providing the equivalent of a shared secured loan, but you're essentially, there's people who own crypto who refuse to sell. They have 5 Bitcoins worth $250,000, but they want to buy a car for $35,000, but they don't want to take the capital gains to sell the Bitcoin, and they don't want to sell it because they believe it's going to go higher in value. So they've formed an internal network only of each other to post that Bitcoin as collateral and to release it in a smart contract when the loan is repaid. I could go on. There's probably 100 examples of ways.
So let me. I want to back up and just try to take. So Paul Fiore starts off working like John under the desk at. Well, you were better looking than me, so they put you in front of the desk. Sounds like you were like a college teller or something. But you see the computer revolution. You go, damn it, missed it. You see the internet revolution. You jump in it. You get moving. You start a company. You offer me a job just to mess with me, and then leave town, and then sell that company to mess with me again with 800 clients for however much you sold it to Intuit. Then you move on, and you've been involved in a lot of other successful things. But now you're back. You're going, hey John, I see what this is the next thing, I think, and what you think that next thing is, and where you're looking at is crypto. And what you see is that it's no longer 2010 where it's this bad guy type of currency. Now it's become more mainstream. We talked about Wyoming. We have a lot of people from Wyoming on here. I know at least one person who, the crypto laws in Wyoming are such that banks and financial institutions in Wyoming can take custody of those assets and lend on them and things like that. Those laws are being written and are still growing. And so and you mentioned that where you your backing data for that is the growth in both industries. And you look at Green Dot, which was Green Dot, it made its money by providing services to the underbanked people who wanted a card but couldn't get a bank account, but needed that card to interact with Hulu and Amazon and services like that. And you're saying, hey, the next thing, this similar thing, if we don't want to be left behind, is this opportunity in crypto, which I happen to agree with you with, by the way.
Yeah.
And so we got to learn about it. It doesn't mean we jump in right now, but we got to start shifting the boat that way a little bit. And do you believe that where this would provide value to the Creighton's is the next round of like, for example, if you're looking to grow as a credit union, do you think that people who provide these services are going to be able to grow in that space?
It's a profound question. Maybe I could start with a quick story about the founding, which leads into that.
Is this the one about your dad and the shoes? I love that one.
No, the Wood Heel Factory. No, so when we started Digital Insight, Daniel Jacoby and I had two questions that we had to answer, and it was probably the thing we debated most. And one was, do we do in-house systems where we, like XP and UltraData and Scimitar and everyone else, sell financial institutions a suite of hardware and software for them to run their network on their own? Or do we run it as a service bureau the way EDS and others ran? And service bureaus were becoming out of favor. Everyone was moving in-house, yet we were proposing to go back to a service bureau architecture. And for a very simple reason, we didn't believe that we could trust, so a lot of these credit unions had very, very young 19-year-old IT guys that were really just moving tape around, backing up, the mainframes. Could they be trusted to run an internet and host a site and not get hacked? And we were going to be doing software releases every 12 hours or every 2 days, not once every 6 months like the way most cores work. So that was question one. And, related to that, credit unions wanted to feel like they owned and controlled their own destiny. So where most people of our biggest competitors were going in-house, PyPace's software, CFI Pro Services, and many others, we decided to do Service Bureau. And it turned out to be the core winning strategy. So we would actually even became a web host where it would say communitycreditunion.org as opposed to digitalinsight.com/communitycreditunion, so that it looked and felt to the member like this was a product and service coming from the credit union. It was a semantics issue, but it was important for the credit union to have that ownership, for the member to feel like they're interacting with their credit union, and for us to be able to distribute software in that way. Interestingly, blockchain is the ultimate service architecture for distributing software that way, which we can talk about later. The other big choice we had is, are we serving financial institutions, B2B, or are we going to start a bank and go direct to consumers? If credit unions and banks were not willing to get and understand that they have to deploy this and market it and get their members comfortable to use it, or whether they could convince their boards that this was something worth taking a risk on, we were thinking about the alternative. And there was probably 5 competitors, including PyPace's, NetBank, and others, that chose the B2C route. They all failed. They all eventually came back to a B2B system. So in my blood, if there's a choice of working for a challenger bank or an entity that wants to just take all the customers and all your members and be with you, and they're doing it piece by piece in the case of DeFi lending and companies like SoFi and Lending Club. And the Chime guy, one of my peer at Green Dot before he left, he's the president of Green Dot to start Chime. They're all nipping at the heels and taking product. And in our industry, it's always been the case that there's been 1 or 2 leading edge financial institutions that are the first to do IRAs, money markets, jumbo CDs, or get into the mortgage market. And then there's a lot of other that realize, okay, it's safe to do so. The same is going to happen in blockchain. It will have to be part of the credit union's DNA. Maybe 3 years ago, you could sit here and say it's too soon. I think now it's becoming obvious it's not going to go anywhere. It's here to stay. And now the question is, what will the members want? And how long will they have to wait for us to provide it? And how can we do it with all the challenges with regulators, or even just internally selling it to our employees, our executives, and our boards?
So let me ask you a question. I want to get your concept here. One of the things we discuss a lot is the gig economy. And, one of the things that we're seeing in the gig economy is now diverse payments. So for example, there are people in the gig economy who get paid, completely in crypto, whether it be Bitcoin or a stable coin like you talked about. Certainly not Tether. They've been in a bit of trouble lately, but some of the other stable coins that you talk about. My thought has always been, and it's never been a problem. I've asked this question before, but it's always been too soon. But do you think we're on the edge of someone coming to like Tom O'Shea, who is on the call, Tom, and he runs Aspire, and wanting to get a loan, but the only way he can show his income, this or her income, this person, is that it's all in crypto assets, similar to the gentleman you introduced me to, Chris Hughes, who's actually going to be on the show, I think, in a couple of weeks or next week, one of the two. But do you think that's part of why we've got to sort of at least understanding this now, and that there's going to be someone that sort of lead, like the internet? You tell me a little bit about this. I'm gonna back up just a second. I'll let you answer that question. I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but you know me well enough to know that's going to happen. What happened the first time that Cranium was audited? When the NCUA showed up and said, "What the hell is this?" Like, you had to been thinking about that. Now, obviously, this guy was, from your Crossing the Chasm experience, was an early adopter, an innovator in that space. So he was willing to sort of take that risk and fight them off. And so you had to have that guy doing battle. But what about the next few? How did that go? So, and then give me the idea about, do you think we're on the cusp of this?
Sure. So, when you're building software, data centers, and technology, you're not building it for the regulators, you're building it to prevent hacking. And they're much smarter, much more sophisticated, much more capable, much more connected, and communicate more effectively with each other than regulators. So for us, it was, how do we build a bulletproof architecture that withstand any hack? And how do we not say that so we become a target for hackers who want to prove us wrong?
Right. How do we not say we're bulletproof?
Yeah, so you deliver a product that works and a solution that's architected properly, and then the regulators take a couple of years to understand what it is and how it works and why it's safe. And they basically take an approach that says, we're not going to ever tell you what you can and can't do, but we're going to rely on you to tell us why it's safe and why the safety and soundness and the preservation of the share insurance fund is preserved. So it starts with architecture, which is probably the most interesting thing about crypto, is explaining to my 14-year-old daughter who owns Bitcoin intently. She used all her birthday money to buy more.
Was she at Robinhood buying GameStop too? We'll go into that later.
Yeah. But, you show basically a Google sheet and you add two people on it. And I'm explaining to her, what if you had to say, hey, Isabella, you have, 500 and your sister has 300. And now you get your friends to come on and you all share the Google sheet, right? And then what if you have to add one person that no one has ever met and you don't really even particularly trust? How could you have confidence that they're not going to update your balance and your sister's balance and give it to themselves? And at the end of the day, we all trust the banks and credit unions and PayPal and any other centralized entity to maintain that. But to your question on the regulators, you're addressing it from a hacking standpoint, that ability to list immutable, append only, and have that be the record for a transaction, whether it's how many Bitcoin you own or how much of that Bitcoin you're applying towards collateral for a regular loan from a financial institution. It's all basically the same core architecture. My advice to financial institutions is, you can't pick the right partners, do it the right way, make it impenetrable, and explain it to the regulators slowly over time. And I know, John, the call you and I were on Clubhouse, there was a San Francisco Federal Reserve.
Yeah. I attracted him. He reached out to me afterwards. I probably shouldn't have spoke up. But he has a good question. I mean, that's the other side of this. So there's the hacking standpoint, but there's also the volatility in the actual funds, which, I think is the bigger concern for people standing in this. So, okay, you just mentioned, 5 Bitcoins at 50,000, but today it's down to 44, and one of the things that I know is something that has to be conquered, and I think it can be, is that, and I think the reason it can be conquered is because these people are taking a long view of it. But Tom's not going to feel comfortable lending $250,000 to someone based on something that's only been worth $250,000 2 months, and 3 months ago it was worth $17,000. So the volatility in that platform, I think, is the other concern.
Sure.
And it seemed like you had some ideas on solving that.
Yeah. So it's being solved now. So you could go to one of the big three DeFi lenders on the crypto space. It's one.
Can you explain DeFi? I don't know if everybody knows what DeFi is.
Sure. So DeFi is simply decentralized finance. So finance is centralized. If PayPal tells you how much you have in your account, and when you send it to John Best, they tell you, okay, we reduced it. You're trusting a centralized.
And they're my single source, right? They're the single source of truth.
They're the one centralized authority with the knowledge of who you are and the knowledge of how much you have, and they could attest to that price or that value, and they know when it moves from person one to person two. That's called CFI, or centralized finance. DeFi is simply the exact same scenario, except it's run by software on something called the blockchain. And there are companies that have realized that, like you said, Tom's not going to maybe lend $1-to-1 to buy a car with crypto collateral, but Aave.com, AAVE, or Compound, or many others, essentially each have over $5 billion of liquidity pool where they are providing that. And the way they solve for that problem is they have number one, a multiple of collateral. So to want to borrow Bitcoin, you have to post 150% of that value. And two, they have a liquidation methodology so that if Bitcoin does, go down in price, that there's a mechanism for you to provide more collateral or to pay back the loan.
Like a stop limit, sort of.
Yeah. And again, there are now hundreds of billions of dollars in loans being made. I think even in personal loans, it was $138 billion last year from companies like Lending Club and others. That would have been the equivalent of, 8 to 9% of the entire credit union assets being lent by a new player in the market that you were never concerned with before, right? And blockchain-based lending is going to be the same thing. I know for a fact, if, John, you know this, if you just do a report from your own credit union of how many ACH outbounds, sort them by name, you could figure out which ones are CoinList and Coinbase and Gemini.
CoinMama, Bittrex, Binance. Yeah.
So the $1.5 trillion that's in crypto, the whole credit union industry is about 1.7 trillion, has all happened in the last couple of years. So that money didn't come out of thin air. It came from banks, from credit unions, from Wall Street.
Right. Some wealth was created by the rise of it, but for the most part, that has, if you look at and we did run some reports. I think I shared with you this. We ran, I think Pete's on the call. Sedgwick, you there?
Yes, sir.
How much did we see out of your credit union? It was like over a couple million, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact number, but it was over $1 million.
So introduce yourself so everybody knows real fast. Sorry.
Hi, my name's Pete Sedgwick, and I'm the CIO at Deere Employees Credit Union.
And so what's interesting about Deere, Paul, is their only seg is Deere, John Deere. So I was working with their CEO and Pete, and I just wanted to do an experiment. I wanted to know how much money in a credit union like that. They're good sized credit union. They're all digital, but how much money is going out to these types of things. So we just did two. I think we just did Bittrex and Coinbase, just that alone. But what the other interesting thing was, we expected to see kind of a young age group, and this went. It was evenly divided all the way up into the 60s and 70s, wasn't it, Pete?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was an even distribution.
Yeah, which we were surprised at. So that kind of makes your point that this is happening, right? And it's death by 1,000 cuts. So how does that cut into Deere's, liquidity, particularly on their spread for lending and things like that, right? If that money's going to transition. So yeah, I think it's fascinating, that's there. So what you're advocating is, to begin with, to learn about crypto, to really understand it, and then once you get kind of in that boat, to start keeping a good eye on your regulators, keeping a good eye on Wyoming, and maybe even find a way to, as you mentioned, to sort of dip your toe into some of these services, figure out which one it is that would be valuable and bring value to you.
My take is it's all communication. I remember I was at Affinity Federal Credit Union, I think it was 91, and I was running lending, and we didn't have a mortgage program or a home equity line of credit program. And we would get paid by Chase $300, where we would put a stack of mortgage applications for Chase Bank on our every teller's counter, and it would have a sticker of our credit union on it. And every time one of our members got a mortgage loan from Chase, we would get $300. And I remember presenting to the board, why don't we do our own mortgage program? And the issue was, we don't, we have the cash, but we want that money back. So we had to get, Federal Home Loan Bank authorized so we could sell on the secondary market. So the point is, it was lingo, right? Mortgage, loans, secondary market, packaging, sales, points. Once that process of communicating to the executive team and to the board happened, then it became obvious. And I think that's the biggest challenge. It's really difficult to communicate a very, very complicated topic like crypto and blockchain and DeFi to an unsophisticated board of directors, which are volunteers of credit unions. So that's the magic. How do you present it in a way? And for me, it's eliminating the lingo. And I know it's very difficult. I probably threw out some terms here that may be unfamiliar to some of you, but that's the magic. How do you communicate an extremely complicated topic that's still fairly new to a lay audience?
So to piggyback on that, though, one thing I'm pretty good at, and I know you're really good at it, is I'm pretty good at picking up when a term is sort of gaining traction. Like it's one of my little, I think, superpowers, right? I think DeFi is just gaining traction out there. Like I'm hearing it more and more, I'm seeing it more and more. It's made my spider sense go off, which means that it's just a matter of time before Tom O'Shea, some member of Tom O'Shea's board goes, "Hey, Tom, what the hell is DeFi?" Right? Because to your point, it's better to get to it first than to have them come to you to some extent. Mike had a quick question. Mike, you want to just unpause and say it out loud so I don't have to read it?
Yeah, just based on what I've been, just what Paul just said recently about, just the newness of it all. But recently we all saw in the news that Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, she had a critique on crypto, saying it's inefficient and just didn't give it a positive outlook. So do you think this has an impact on crypto, or is it just kind of a speed bump on its way to mainstream?
Yeah, it's like the Postmaster General saying, email is going to really be bad. We should really.
That was a great analogy, man.
No, I mean, listen,
I was thinking about Jamie Dimon saying it was horrible, and then months later coming out with his own.
Yeah. But listen, GameStop stock moved 90% in 30 minutes. So you could point to U.S. dollars being used by criminal elements and wire transfer being used by hackers. There's always going to be risk and opportunity for bad actors. And there's always the early part of a new technology, and then there's the mature part. It was the case for the internet as well. I would go to credit unions and have to defend why there was front page news that the Pentagon's website got hacked. And credit unions don't want reputation risk. They didn't want to launch an internet banking product and then be in the front page that their site got hacked. So there's always going to be fear and anxiety, and there's always going to be people on the outside that are, warnings. But it's not stoppable. It's $1.5 trillion. It's just beginning to get started. It's going to be a lot bigger. The question is how to get started. Like, what's the right early entry service to offer your members? Because they're already there, especially if they're your younger, more sophisticated members. Just like the internet, they're there waiting for you.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was thinking was, how do we turn this into a growth opportunity? I feel like there's a whole bunch of people, and I feel like the philosophy of the crypto group is very much aligned, as you pointed out, with Green Dot. It's very much aligned with the credit union philosophy. So I want to take some questions from the audience. But to do that, I see Tariq has one, so we'll get there in a minute. My first one, I'll let you read that, but I just want to kick it over to Tom and say, hey, Tom, so next week I want to see what your thoughts are. So next week you go, hey, board, I've been talking to Paul Fiore, and yep, I got some Bitcoin here. I'm ready to do the Bitcoin thing. I mean, how do you see this? I love having Tom on because he's a CEO, he's a very forward, he definitely falls into your innovator space in the chasm. What are your thoughts here, Tom?
So, Paul, it's great to see you. We, go back to his Jersey days, and we crossed paths, way back then, and we'd often catch up at GACs and other types of events like that. And I saw your name on the agenda for today. I was thrilled that you're out there. But if I wanted to, here's my problem. If I wanted to get into pot banking, marijuana banking, There are a couple of
And we know you do, so we'll just go there. But yeah.
Well, getting into pot and getting into pop banking are two different things, John.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I was going the wrong way.
But if I did, there are a couple of credit unions that have written the playbook, how to handle BSA, how to handle the whole compliance issue. You can purchase, the package, and because I see the value, the economics of this, I can buy that. In this space, there's not yet that package, and when you say Bitcoin, most people think, crypto or a blockchain, they think Bitcoin. They don't separate the two to say, well, here's the blockchain, which is a whole other conversation about what that can be. But then how do you take the Bitcoin and, I would need that playbook to say, all right, here's how you risk manage, here's how you move the money in and out, here's how you control it, how you vet people and so on. Because we don't have the resources. We're all credit unions, 95% of us are too small to dedicate the resources to building that. But that's the type of thing it's going to take to get this into the mainstream. And I agree, blockchain itself, but some interaction with crypto and what's happening in fintechs is coming. That train's left the station. And if we're not on getting on the ride, we're definitely going to be left behind, because like John said, like Paul said, there's more and more small companies that are just chipping away at it. The cost of entry into banking is very high, but you can nip off any little component with ease. And the credit union space is going to continue to shrink, and we're going to be left out if we don't get into that.
Well, and so what I hear you advocating for is possibly the Paul Fiore crypto QSO, is what I'm hearing.
Could play like that, yeah.
Fiore coin. No, I think it's a good point. And so if you had that playbook, you would go to your board, is what I'm hearing.
Then you're in a position to go to your board and lay it all out, say, here's how it works, here are the risk factors, here's how we manage it. Because the regulators are going to be all over you. And if you haven't double crossed your T's and really hardly dotted your I's, you're toast. Because they are so...
This one's such a hot potato. It's probably as big a hot potato as the internet was at the time. Which is why I thought it was appropriate to talk to Paul about it,
Yeah.
Because he lived that. That's why I asked about the regulators. Hey, Tariq, can you unmute or pop up and ask your question? I think it's a good one. Tariq is working with us on some other things, and he always has good viewpoints on this. Tariq, do you mind?
Yeah, I guess kind of 2 points. I know it's been in the news a lot, like, people like Elon Musk and Chatham, I forget how to pronounce the last name, but a lot of influencers are kind of pumping, it looks like, Bitcoin and Doge. Do you think it helps or hurts, or what are your thoughts around that? Because I know there's been some controversy, especially like the SEC, like who regulates or who steps in.
So I have an interesting perspective, because my ex-wife is Persian, and her best friend, Tanya's husband, is building Elon Musk's 3 combo house in Homely Hills into one area. So the interesting thing is, as most of you know, Dogecoin is one of the crypto coins, one of 4,000. It was built and designed as a joke. They took the Litecoin code and forked it and used it. There's no employees in the company. There's no white paper. There's no technical platform. And they made it unlimited. There's 113 billion Dogecoins outstanding, and there'll be trillions when all is said and done. So it was 100% launched as a joke. Elon Musk loved irony. And what would be more ironic than the joke coin created for fun winds up becoming the currency of the world in the future? I personally don't think that'll ever happen, because there's, I think, 12 wallets that control 50% of all outstanding Dogecoin. But in general, I don't think he could help himself tweeting about Bitcoin. I know it was in jest, but he's talking about Dogecoin, and there's public record of him following up to say that was a joke. It's just, it would be fun for him, I think, if that was the case. It became the universal form of money 20 years from now.
So just to add on to that, though, there is a perspective that I happen to be aware of, because as you know, I work with a lot of the science fiction guys, Kevin J. Anderson, Dr. Clore. And one of the things that we've been trying to figure out, Tariq, is if you're on Mars, how does the stock market work on Mars? Because you are now a day and a half away of everything. So that's something actually that Musk has put some thought into. There are groups that we've been talking. Scott Orskard is part of that. So there are people thinking about that. And right now, DeFi is the closest thing to a solution because it would prevent and automatically lock up those things. So as we remember that some of this was built around the idea of even connecting markets like China and Germany, and it's still pretty antiquated. So there is some solve going on because Elon's stated position is to get to Mars. So if you think about it from that perspective, it does actually have some adjacent understanding, or some adjacent value to Tesla or to SpaceX. So just an interesting concept. And then
John,
you pointed out go ahead.
Ask Chris Hughes about launching an Ethereum node in space. He built it for the space station a couple of years ago. So he'll
I will. I'll ask him when he's on the call. And then Tariq mentions Quantic Bank. They're doing Bitcoin-based rewards instead of CC points. That's
interesting.
That's fascinating because you give those away anyways, right? I mean, I think that people might find more value in that than others. That's just fascinating. I didn't know about them. Did you know about them, Paul?
No, not that name in particular, but the whole concept of taking money from a financial institution earning near zero interest and moving it to a US dollar wrapped around a cryptocurrency like, DAI or, Tether or USDC, which is Goldman Sachs and Coinbase, you could earn between 11 and 17% interest. So that's one of the big reasons that you're going to see money flow out of your credit union into these crypto. They're not even betting on a Bitcoin going up or down. They're simply betting on something pegged to the United States dollar that earns interest. So you can provide liquidity back to the crypto marketplace for the things I mentioned earlier, like arbitrage.
To create that arbitration to allow them to use their assets to buy and purchase. So Cody, who is with Sherpa, which is formerly Corporate One. You may remember Corporate One. I know you worked with them in the past. Probably remember Lee. And Cody's a great guest here. He asked a very good question. He says, Paul, what business model would the credit unions need to adopt to combat this sort of disintermediation and the DeFi business model? Or is it combat or is it join them?
I think the two best things a credit union can do is number one, collaborate, work together. As Tom mentioned, when you have a playbook that one person can write, another person can copy. So it's not just the lifeblood and heritage of the credit union. It's the only way to compete because you're not going to be able to attract new capital because of the equity structure of a credit union. So collaboration is key, fast copying, and following where the members are. If the members are going somewhere and they're getting that service from somewhere else, they would love for you to do it. And when you do, they'll be there waiting.
So from and when you talk about that collaborative sharing, that's part of the digital insight story, right? So, when the first person figured out how to get past the NCUA, I'm pretty sure somebody or you called them and said, hey, what'd you do? Because now I got to tell Steve or tell Tom, or right? Was that part of the sort of how that worked out?
100%, both on the back end for the technology and then the front end on marketing. If one credit union really figured out how to get the word out that this service was now available, they shared those use cases with their peers.
Yeah, if you haven't noticed, Paul's an incredible communicator, and that was I having seen it from afar because we wound up going Carillion, but that was Ted and his group, and having watched you from afar when I was going through that process, I noticed that there was this very good sort of, it just was naturally your ability to sort of say, hey, you kind of caught on when somebody would say something and share that. And people need group leaders like that. That's why I was interested to hear what you were doing and share it with everyone. Other questions? These have been fantastic questions. By the way, Mike, can you just talk about that Wall Street Journal thing real fast? Because I think it makes Paul's point.
No, it kind of gives credibility to, banks are doing it. So why not credit unions? That was kind of my message. It's like, okay, it's already being done. So credit unions, trying to step on the train, I'm assuming. So I'd love to get Paul's reaction from that as well.
So that was BNY Mellon, right?
Yeah.
So BNY Mellon is
article.
Obviously, you came from New York. I'm sure you know who they are, Paul.
I remember Daniel Jacoby and I, my co-founder, CTO of Digital Insight, went to watch a movie together one day. And at the end of the trailer, of one of the trailers, was a www.suchandsuchthemovie.com. And we looked at each other And it was that realization that it's here and it's happening. I think when Mass Mutual announced they were buying Bitcoin, when BNY Mellon announced what they're working on, each one is part of a chain of events that take something from obscurity to mainstream. And I would have never been able to have this conversation in 2017, even though that's when I felt like it had hit the mainstream, because there's always a lag, because communication is difficult, right? I have this, my philosophy is your job as a communicator is to create a soundbite, put it on a spoon, and to give it to somebody so that it's repeatable, so that when they take that point and re-communicate it to someone else, the game of telephone doesn't distort and reduce the message over signal time. And that's the message of a communicator, to give information that's accurate, timely, truthful, and easy to comprehend. And it's kind of been lost in our society, I think, with the way people communicate through social media today, but that's a critical need. And I think that's the role of each of us when we talk to your colleagues and your boards.
So another question, we're getting towards the end here. This is from my friend Michael out in Town and Country, in Maine. He says, in the future, do you see using crypto as the digital currency and blockchain as a fractional asset? So we'd be dealing with cryptocurrency tied to fractional assets. I see that. I think, you know, that's what we were talking about, loan participations. I don't see how we can, I don't see how someone like Tom, you know, can grow. And Mike, you're welcome to expand on it if you want to unmute. But
yeah, sure. Sure, thanks. I appreciate that. So, you know, I use this as the example I always use for this is my house, right? I own my house, and the bank owns a fraction of my house. But why do I want to own my house, right? I'd rather own 1/100th of 100 different houses, right? And then I have some asset there that's like a right to live, right? So that I own that on the blockchain, the right to live, so that I can live in my house, but I only own maybe 1/100th of the house. But so what I'm curious about is you have the cryptocurrency there as, you know, as the platform for the currency itself, but then this fractional asset and the lending around fractional assets, whether that's, you know, whether that's in a, almost like an old school credit union where it's just people itself or the credit union itself owning fractions and then being able to use the cryptocurrency and the fractions there and the fractional assets for lending and ownership.
And Tariq just posted a site, company that's doing it. And
okay.
I think Chris mentioned it too, it's called Block, but go ahead, Paul.
My personal belief is Bitcoin is just simply a hedge. You know, everyone thinks of inflation as CPI and PPI, the Consumer and Producer Price Index, but the truth is, you know, if a cheeseburger, fries, and a Coke at McDonald's is nominally higher than it was 10 years ago, asset inflation is significantly higher. So the things that we all spend chunks of our income on are housing, you know, healthcare, tuition. Those things are going up way faster than nominal price inflation. So if you have an asset like Bitcoin that is fixed in terms of its number that'll ever be there, it's going to replace all the people that, you ever watch late night television and someone's pitching gold and silver and coins and all? Every one of those guys is attracting to a deep inbred feeling that people have that their money is going to go away. And it's in America, we've been spoiled. It hasn't happened here, hyperinflation and the loss of value of wages. But it happened in Brazil recently. It's happening in Argentina now. It's happening in many, many countries. So anyone who's immigrated here from a society where that devaluation of that currency has been real, every one of them understands the value of a hedge like gold. And everyone who sees gold realizes that when the price goes up, you just mine more. With Bitcoin, there's a fixed supply, so you'll never be able to get more. And it's a lot easier to sell one Bitcoin than going on the street corner of Mumbai and selling 1 ounce of gold. And you can make change for it, and you can travel with it. You could bring $50 million worth of Bitcoin on a piece of paper on an airplane.
I'll give you a good example. So a friend of mine, they run a family trust, which I didn't know what that was before. Not family trust, family office. That's the name of it. And one of their main people was this guy who was hyper successful in Venezuela, owned a car dealership and did really well. Well, one day, apparently the leadership of Venezuela came by and said, "You have done fantastic. Good job. We'll take it from here." And suddenly they took half of his bank account because the bank was part of the government rule. And they said, here's your appropriate pay for what you've done. You've done a great job for the country of Venezuela. Bye-bye. And, from that point on, he found the family office and started moving his money into assets, because they can't do that if it's in a crypto asset, right? And so that was a big thing.
In terms of the fractionization question, my 2 cents is I remember when someone explained to me the share economy, and it was, you have a house next to my house, and we both have a lawnmower, but you use it once a week, I use it once a week. Why don't we get a shed, and in that shed put a lock that each of us have access to, and we share that lawnmower and you use it when you need it? And then what if that shed was virtual and we could give anyone the key, even people that we don't know and don't trust? So that pretty much explains how you would do these fractional shares and assets. Yeah.
No, I agree. So Gary Coates, which, by the way, interesting story about him. Gary was Ted Spooner's first employee, and the guy I worked with to bring up your competitor at Suncoast, because for whatever reason we didn't choose you. I think at the time it was because of you didn't sweat when you came. It was, by the way, that place was called the Cafe Creole. Remember that? That was the name of the restaurant. And anybody that doesn't sweat in Florida, we're suspicious of. But anyways, Gary was my partner in that, and then still around and in credit unions. He asked, do you think blockchains could replace ATM networks and shared branching?
Gary, hey, say hi to Ted Spooner. I talked to him not too long ago. Tremendous respect and admiration for anyone that was an entrepreneur and did something good for our industry.
Yeah, it was a wild ride.
Yeah, but for me, I specifically, so something very unique happened. So I left the credit union in 1994 to join a software company, XP Systems. And my first task was to negotiate a contract that had already been signed with EDS to do diskette-based distribution of online banking. And they were going to settle transactions on the EDS ATM network, which is called ePallet. And when the web browser came in, it really became clear that that was not needed and unnecessary. Actually, a funny story, because I flew to Plano, Texas to tell Joe Brownstead and Keith Loki at EDS that we were going to get out of our contract. And, sorry, but I was worried that they were going to sue me or sue us. So I wanted to tell them that, we're starting something different, but, we're doing internet and they're doing, we're doing browser-based, blah, blah, blah. And then Keith Loki wound up working for Digital Insight, and he told the story one day in front of our host staff of how I came in arrogantly to Plano, Texas, telling EDS with their 15,000 employees and $5 billion in cash that me and my firm are going to compete with you. And I don't think it went down that way, but it was a funny story. So the question is, if you have a network, it's simply pulling together financially and transactionally records. And I loved what shared branching did by basically leveraging the ATM network to do it. Or Bitcoin, I feel like it probably is going to be a consortium base of credits that join together. And maybe it'll be by the corporates, maybe it'll be some new venture that'll provide that custodial and the storage, and the settlement will just run on the blockchain. You won't need the ATM network per se, and especially the fees that they would charge to clear the transaction. It's really just the settlement at the end of the day to net out the cash.
And it's real time, which is what needs to happen, because too many people are taking advantage of the non-real time, and that's why it hasn't changed, because there's money to be made in the float. Well, listen, we are at our time. We did have another great question from John Finlay. Paul, if you want to email me an answer to this, I'll send it out to everybody, but we try to be respectful of the time, particularly yours. Thank you so much. It's always a blast to talk to you. I could tell you enjoyed this. I know you well enough. I hope you'll join us maybe if it's next week or whatever, when Chris comes back on. I think it'd be cool to have you as well. Someone's got to stop Chris, and so I'm not sure I can. I'm hoping maybe you can. So thank you so much for taking the time with us. Thank you everyone for joining. This will be posted out on the web. Paul will make sure you get a copy of it to tweet it out. What an incredible insight, no pun intended. Thank you so much, man. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And I'll send this Quadriga, or Melissa will, this Quadriga fiasco question to you. So if you don't mind, maybe give us a little quick response, and we'll just send it out to everybody.
Will do.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Paul.
Great to see you.
Bye, Tom. Good to see
Well
you.
done.
Take care.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.
Oh, yeah. We will.